The interesting thing in the early days of digital technology was the discovery that we could actually produce phenomena, that we could produce emotive space, that we could produce we could shift ideas about reality and perspective. We could augment space with sound, with time. It was actually fascinating and I realized in that period that all the things that we were trying to do was everything architects had always wanted to do. That was what was really interesting. It wasn't that it was a completely new mode of operation. It was, you could go back to Ledoux or Boulez or Piranesi or, as far back as you want in terms of envisioning these kind of complex worlds. So I think a project that, sort of talked about that for us that's very well known is the Yas Hotel in Abu Dhabi. Which was kind of an interesting project for us to do, because coming off the virtual reality work from many years ago and the virtual Guggenheim, and here we were all of a sudden, 20 years later, almost, producing a very important iconic building for Abu Dhabi, a hotel, but a hotel that was set over the Formula One track, would be incredibly mediated in the sense that, we heard and we've seen since, 600 million plus people watched F1, in those last races. And I counted last November when the race was on, I think I had someone in the office count for me just out of curiosity, that the Yas Hotel showed up, 106 times, and 60 of those times were the laps, because every lap, the helicopter flies over the building. And so, the fact that architecture can exist in the media sphere or in media space or in the electrosphere if it goes through the internet is kind of had someone said that 20 years ago when we were in the virtual stock exchange or Guggenheim, it sounded a bit weird that the work would be so occupied virtually and so understood as another thing, even though it's physical and real. So we've moved our kind of long-standing interest and research in the digital, let's say, from the early days of virtual sketching, virtual reality modeling, the making of sort of these phenomenal spaces and understanding them into and through, let's say, a conduit of representation and efficiencies in making and modeling to now manufacturing and actual implementation, because we realize the next wave in this kind of digital revolution, let's say, if there is such a thing. And by the way, I say that very carefully because one of my little pet theories about the digital is that we're in the seminal kind of early moments, the very embryonic moments actually of this phenomena. And I think that when we look at this from 100 years forward back to this time, we will have seen that it was very naive in some ways, and a very early stages in what's coming down the pipe, let's say. I think the way robots will begin to work in our world and in our discipline in particular, the way computer-aided manufacturing goes, the tie-ins between design and what goes out into the world, the material research, how materials will change. I have students in Vienna who are looking at 3D printing, projects where the 3D print changes from solid to void to glass to another material all in one print. So, you look at that result and you say, why do we even have window frames in buildings? Why do we even have mullions, or sort of the way we stick build things still in a very old medieval way? So, that's coming. It may be a long way out, but in anticipation of that, we've started doing projects that at least are, and again I say carefully, that are just touching the surface of this problem. We designed a project in Korea, 2 projects in Korea that are interesting on this front. One is built, one isn't. The one that isn't built is the Bello Towers, where we tried to push an idea of computer-aided milling and manufacture of facade pieces that could be flat packed, essentially brought to site and craned up and sealed into prefabbed units. And it's a dream that came in architecture from the 60s and late 50s and 60s with Metabulus and others. But now we have the tools and mechanisms to carry this off and then even push it further. So we looked at that in that project. And then the other side of that equation, I guess, would be the little museum, multimedia museum we built in Daegu, South Korea, which is a kind of, it's a ETFE pillowed structure that hangs over a pool of water that has inside a 360-degree cinema screen and 64 high-res, or 80, 64 I think, high-res video projectors that do simultaneous broadcast of a single film that runs inside that space. So the spatiality you enter into is in fact a fully navigable, virtualized sort of projection. And you go into a building that is manufactured, actually, it could have been 3D printed, that building. I mean, the way it's thought of, in anticipation of the possibility of 3D printing an entire structure, it had to be built by cranes and with bolts, but it's designed that if one were to take the drawings 10 years from now, you probably could just hit a button and generate that building.